One of the greatest of the inquirers into such mysteries was the Renaissance polymath Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa von Nettesheim, whose life was spent searching tirelessly through the works of ancient and modern writers to perfect his own system of occult philosophy. If any man deserved to partake of mystic knowledge, it was he, for his scholarship was boundless and his respect for the unseen powers profound. But in his house, the story was told, there lodged a student who possessed none of the master's wisdom. One day, when the great man was away from home, the student managed to slip into Agrippa's study. The young meddler read the open pages of the book on the lectern, then turned the leaves, made it was whispered afterwards of dead men's skin, in awestruck fascination. So absorbed was he that he first was not aware of another figure in the room. When he did look up, he nearly died of fright, for there stood before him a demon. Might have been the devil himself, who demanded to know why he had been sent for. The student had no answer, but a gasp of horror, and the demon throttled him on the spot, leaving his corpse as a warning against interference in the dangerous powers contained in books. Agrippa, it was said, took no more students into his house from that day forward. The country people of Brittany in former times knew all too well the perils that attended books, and would have been glad to have had nothing to do with the insidious objects. But against their will, these folks were the guardians of certain volumes of great antiquity and power, which were known after the famous philosopher as Agrippas. Originally, the Agrippas had resided in the keeping of the priests to whom the peasants looked for spiritual protection. While the books lay safely under lock and key in monastic libraries, the holy aura of the church sufficed to contain the demonic forces bottled within them. But in a troubled era, when the church was torn by strife and its priests scattered, some of the Agrippas found their way into possession of ordinary families, who were left to cope unaided with the dark, intricate knowledge of a vanished age. The potency of an Agrippa came from the fact that it was signed by the devil himself. Its text listed the names of all the demons and indicated the services they could perform for humankind: gratification of lusts, acquisition of knowledge otherwise forbidden, and of wealth untold. More perilously, gave instructions for summoning these infernal servants. Hence it was possible to tell if a person had opened an Agrippa, even if he tried to keep it a secret. The sulphurous breaths of devils and the smoke of hell lingered in his hair and clothes. An Agrippa, it seemed, was itself a demon. A book of enormous size, as tall as a man, was a living thing with a will and stubborn temper of its own. It violently resented being consulted, and would only submit after a long and exhausting struggle. Even if the owner forbore to open the book's cover, its unpredictable rages meant that it was a perpetual danger. It could destroy the building it was housed in, or drive its owner mad, for it had all the heat and fury of hellfire bound up within its pages. Sages suggested the only way to ensure it did no harm was to keep it padlocked, hanging by a chain from a twisted beam in an otherwise empty room. But few who owned an Agrippa could resist the curiosity that compelled them toward it. Possession of an Agrippa, with all the troubles that it brought, was a life sentence, or worse than that. When its owner was dying, the Agrippa, sensing abandonment, would create a terrible uproar, driving the farm animals into frenzy, shaking the stone walls of the house and its outbuildings. The only force that could stop it was ritual exorcism by the parish priest. Instructed by the cleric, the family would light a pile of straw and haul the Agrippa into the flames. The great book would burn with a fierce heat, and soon be consumed to ashes. These the priest would meticulously gather up into a little pouch, which he would hang around the dying man's neck, and bury with him to rid the survivors of any residual affliction, and to free them for all time from the curse of such a dangerous possession. In Penavin, close to the Brittany coast, where the gales swept in off the Atlantic, There lived a stout-hearted man who once tried to rid himself of the stubborn Agrippa that had been his family's for generations, but he succeeded only in proving the book's implacable power. Leoscos was a Breton of taciturn determination and much physical strength. Huge, rebellious Agrippa in his house had become such a nuisance to him that he could tolerate its presence no longer. He called on a nearby farmer, who, according to local gossip, dabbled in magic. Leoscos raised the topic circumspectly, finding the man intrigued, even envious of his possession. Not at all worried by its well-known perils, he offered the farmer the book. To his relief, the gift was accepted. A few nights later, everyone in the district heard a terrible din. It was Leoscos dragging his complaining Agrippa by its chain to the neighbor's farm. He managed to manhandle the resisting bulk to the farmer's house, and together the two men forced it into an attic room. When the door was locked upon it, they went downstairs to the spacious, low-ceilinged kitchen, where the farmer poured 2 much-needed tots of brandy to revive them. Few words were exchanged, and Leoscos did not stay long. When at last the farmhouse door swung to behind him and he heard its heavy bolt fall into place, he pursed his usually grim lips and whistled a snatch of an old Breton folk tune. As he entered his own house, however, his mood darkened. He went to the door of the room where the Agrippa had been imprisoned. He opened it a crack, but he only knew what he would see. There was the great black book hanging once more from its crooked beam, and turning slowly on its stout chain. Leoscos grew desperate. He made a huge fire and heaved the book onto the pyre, but the flames, although they burned as brightly as ever, drew away from the book and would not touch it. When the fire had burned itself out, the Agrippa's cover hardly felt warm. Since the fire had proved no help, Leoscos resolved to try water. He hauled the book down to the beach, where he tied it to several stones as large as he could lift. Somehow he got the whole cumbersome bundle into his boat and put out to sea with it. Once in deep water, he hoisted the weighted book out of the boat. It sank, and the water closed over it. As he beached his boat, he glanced back over his shoulder, and what he saw froze his blood. The book had risen again, and with incredible speed it glided towards the shore. Its chain rasped on the pebbles. It passed him on the beach and sped towards the house. Just as he expected, when Leoscos reached home, the Agrippa was hanging once more by its chain. Its cover was bone dry. Its pages did not even smell of the sea. Unbeliever though he was, he finally turned to the church to help him. But each time he tried to summon the priest, some accident ensured his message was not received. First, he sent a farmhand to deliver his plea, but halfway to the church, the man fell from his horse and broke his neck. Next, Leoscos went himself to beg for aid, but he found the cleric had died the night before. He tried again with the new incumbent and found himself paralyzed with sudden seizure before he could give voice to his request. He died soon after. But the Agrippa's brooding presence so darkened his house that no one would live in it from that day forward.